So you've decided to develop an edible landscape. Well, before you invest too much time and energy, wouldn't you like to know how not to kill your edible landscape? So what I'm gonna do with you today is I'm gonna show you a couple of ways to make sure that the effort you're putting into developing your edible landscape actually comes to fruition. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill, and let me tell you, over the past few years, I've made a few mistakes that I've had to learn and research from as to why when I would plant an edible landscape, why my crops weren't producing or why my plants weren't producing. So I thought what I would do is share these ideas with you and hopefully shortcut some of your time and allow you to have more production much faster. Now, you'll notice that I'm standing in front of my house here for the first one here, and that's going to be knowing what the soil around your home is. It's important to note that when you start thinking about what your house is built on, what's the foundation put on, the soil around it, I almost really shouldn't even call it soil. It's actually dirt. And so for the most part, homes are built on clay bases. And so that clay doesn't by and large produce or doesn't create an optimal scenario for building a good healthy plant base and for plants to flourish in. So you really need to develop a different type of soil base, not just dirt, but you need soil there instead. And so one of the things that you can do is you can actually raise up the bed, have more of a raised bed, and actually build in the soil. But if you're trying to put plants and get them to grow in that clay, it's just not going to be very effective. I know we got the idea, we had a rock bed around one of our homes and we were going to pull those rocks back. We did that. We pulled the layer under it, the weed barrier under it, and looked under it, and I started to till it up and just went around for a little bit with a rake, and it was literally just like trying to pull through rocks. It was not going to grow. So first thing you need to know is don't trust the soil around your home. Consider adding more good quality soil in. And again, you're not thinking about, you're not producing large, huge garden areas, right? I mean, we're not talking about an acre here. You just need a small amount of soil to get growing with. So number one is know what soil you're planting in and don't just plant in dirt like clay. Okay, so we talked about making sure you know what type of soil you're planting in, and again, you can pick these up. You can buy organic garden soil just as a starting point. But I thought one of the things that would be that would be important is to know how to amend your soil, because over time your soil is going to need nutrients placed back in it. And one of the easy things that you can do is start to use some compost. You're probably already producing things in your home. You're eating vegetables, you've got vegetable scraps, you're probably throwing them in the trash, throwing them down the garbage disposal. Stop doing that. You want to use those to begin making compost. And you can also, from the leaves that are falling from the trees in your yard, that's another option. Combine those things together, get a compost bin, start rotating that, and you can add that into the soil and begin to mix it in. And I'll show you one of the things that we've got here, and we've got bigger ones, so I'll kind of give you some options here. I've got some wood chips in this. I've got, like I said, some food scraps in here, and there's leaves in this as well. And I just turned this yesterday, but what I want to show you is notice the dark coloration in that. Those are all going to break down, be a good carbon and nitrogen source to literally begin to feed your plants. So you don't have to put these synthetic fertilizers on there, and I'm going to show you another option in just a moment related to that. But you can begin to make your own compost as a way to support amending your plants, and that's going to make them produce better. That carbon, that nitrogen is going to be a fuel source for them so that they can grow and actually produce and not just germinate and then sort of peter out in a few weeks. All right, so the next consideration you want to make sure you're not killing your edible landscape is think about what you're putting around your plants and around your trees. If you saw the video I shot that gave you options on how to create your edible landscape, one of the options I gave you was using the trees that you already have existing and making sure that instead of just putting mulch there, you're growing that. But here's the thing, you want to be considered about, if you are going to use mulch, what kind of mulch are you using? Now, let me contrast these for you and show you where the concern comes in, because the last thing you want to do is use a mulch that has toxins in it that ultimately end up in the plants that you're thinking about eating. So here's what we've got. So you'll see that this is a mulch. This is one that we produced and mixed a couple of different things in. And the important thing here is that we knew where this was coming from. So we knew that there were no toxins in this. And that's a big consideration, because if you look at most of the mulches that are out there, they're going to have some type of color added into them. So you'll see that they have a black dye, a red dye, or a brown dye added into them. Make sure that you're not choosing these as options, because those dyes are going to be toxic and again are going to ultimately leach down into the ground and be picked up by the food source that you're trying to grow around the trees that you have. So make sure you're choosing toxin-free, dye-free mulches as your mulching source. And again, these are good because these suppress your weed growth, so you want these. Just make sure you're choosing the right options. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make and that will definitely kill your edible landscape is inadvertently and not realizing that you're using chemicals around the home and around your lawn that by nature are intended to kill. So there's a lot of these that are out there. You can find these at the home improvement box stores, and the active names on these things are going to be things like glyphosate, 2,4-D, atrazine. These are very toxic substances, and by nature they're designed to kill. They're used in large-scale agriculture as an herbicide. Now, what's significant about this and sort of the dynamics that you want to think about here is that if you apply these chemicals to your lawn, not only are they having an effect locally where you apply them, but they can move as well. And when a rain comes, if those things haven't dried, they're going to move into other areas of your lawn. Not to mention that most of these chemicals by nature are pesticides. So when you talk about the growing good, healthy, whether it's grass, whether it's plants that you're going to be eating, the microbes in the ground are extremely important. The fungus, especially the bacteria, you need to make sure that those are not being killed, and that's going to come as a result of avoiding these different toxic chemicals that are often used for weed suppression. Now, one of the things that you also want to consider is that you're going to be out there on that lawn. And if you look at the life that these chemicals have, it's not of short duration. They're going to be there for a while. And there's some controversy about that, but by and large, we know now that the lifespan of these things is longer than what has been typically talked about in the past. And what's important about that is that means that you're going to be exposed to it when you're touching the lawn, when you're out there working with your plants. Your kids are going to be exposed to it. Your animals are going to be exposed to it. So you just don't want to run the risk. So, you know, there's better options. Depending on where you're at, if you want to use something like vinegar to get rid of those weeds, or if you want to use a little salt, but you want to be conscientious where you're putting that, those are all suitable options to work with where you're not running the risk of putting those chemicals down that could be destroying. The other thing is that if you're looking to try to, there's some other options out there basically. You don't just have to, there's oils. Your different essential oils are a great option as well. Cedar oil, cinnamon oil. These are things that you can use as an adjunct that you want to give consideration to. I've got one last point I want to make on this, and that is to say that when you start looking at ways to, instead of trying to just build the area around your edible landscape, your lawn with these harsh chemicals, just making sure you got grass, take a different approach. Don't take the approach of killing off what you don't want to be there. Take the approach instead of building up the resources in your lawn where your grass can grow more efficiently than the weeds and begin to give you the lush lawn that you're looking for. And that way you're not putting yourself, your family, your animals, or your plants and your food that you're going to be eating at risk. All right, the next tip I have for you to stop killing your edible landscape is going to be to stop using fertilizers, and that may seem a little counterintuitive because we typically think about fertilizers as being supporting plant growth. Now, here's the thing about this. When I speak about fertilizers, I'm really talking about your synthetic fertilizers, the ones that are predominantly your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You can use these, and if you've got something that's going to have a quick turnaround time, say less than 60 days, you can probably get away with using those, because by the time those are meant to supercharge the plant right away, just give it a burst of nutrients right away to drive growth. But keep in mind that for a healthy plant that's going to provide a lot of nutrition, you need more than just nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus in there. So you actually need to reconsider the types of amendments you're using, the type of fertilizer you're using. I would recommend one that has a much broader array of nutrients in it, apart from just your NPK, sort of that 3-digit number you see on your different fertilizer bags. Instead, use a broader blend of options, and also use products that are going to have a carbon source in them. So things like molasses might be added into that. You'll see that there will be bacteria and fungus added into these types of options. For things that take longer to grow, or that are going to be, you're going to be using for production for several months, I would definitely recommend not choosing a synthetic fertilizer, because if you do, what you're going to find is that in the first few weeks to month or two, that plant is going to look really good. It's going to have good growth, and about the time that you get your first yield on it and you're ready to get your second yield, you're going to see that it starts to lose its momentum. It's just not going to be producing as good anymore, and you're going to be forced to continue to add more and more fertilizer versus having a healthy plant that has a lot of nutritional value to it, which is, again, ultimately what we're looking for here. Now, we all know that you can't expect plants to grow without water and without hydration, but if you want to stop killing that edible landscape, you got to think about where that hydration's coming from. Now, if you have rainwater, that's great, but many of us are going to be in areas that we're going to need to add some water, especially when those roots get limited on how far they can reach down. You're going to have an external source of hydration for your plants, and many times you're going to be tempted to just hook up the faucet, hook a hose up to the faucet, spray those plants. But instead, I want to give you a different option on this, and that's going to be some type of water collection source. And the reason being on this is that when you hook it up to the faucet, unless you're on a well system, you're going to be at the mercy of what's in the water supply from the city. And of course, when you think about that, they're definitely at a minimum going to be chlorinating that water, and you don't want to be adding that chlorine to your plants. And then there's also the concerns, many, especially larger cities, are going to have concerns with some of the toxicants that are found in their water supply, whether that's chemicals, whether it's metals, whether it's even medications. Those are all considerations. So you just don't want to add that type of stuff to your soil to ultimately run risk for what effect that's going to have on the plant, or if it even ends up in the plant. So having some type of water collection system is the way to go around that. It's actually pretty astonishing how much water is collected from a small rain. When you start thinking about, especially if you have gutters on your home, and how much water all starts running down into those gutters from that hits your roof and comes down. This can collect a lot of water. At our previous residence, we didn't have rain barrels, but what we did have was a fountain that had a big reservoir in it, and when a rain came, it would always overflow. And so what we would do instead is we would just collect water out of our fountain and feed our plants with that. If you don't want to go to the extent of a rain barrel, an easy option that you can do, and this is one we used to use as well, is we would just take 5-gallon buckets. You can get a 5-gallon bucket for $2, $3 and just put that out, collect them in a rain bucket, put the lid back on it, store that water, and when you need it to hydrate those plants, you can just put it in or just use it over your different plants, and you've got a clean water source that you don't have to worry about what's in that. So listen, guys, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I really hope this information allows you to have a edible landscape and not feel like you're spinning your wheels, killing your plants, and you're putting this effort in it. I hope it gives you production right out of the gates. If you like the information, make sure that you give us a like down below and share this information with others out there so that they can start producing their own healthy food. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Arland Hill.